The day my children told me I was too old for Thanksgiving dinner, something inside me shattered. Not my heart. No, that had been chipped away at for years. What broke was the illusion that my sacrifices meant anything to them. I'd spent decades putting their needs before mine, even paying their mortgages well into their adulthood. But that November morning, standing in my kitchen, clutching my phone as my daughter's cold voice echoed through the speaker, I realized some debts can never be repaid, and others can be canceled with a single phone call to the bank. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Winters. At 72, I've lived through enough seasons to know when autumn truly arrives, not by the changing leaves, but by the shifting of family dynamics. I raised 3 children in a sprawling Victorian home on Maple Street in Lakeside, Connecticut. My husband Richard passed nearly 15 years ago, leaving me with memories, an impressive portfolio of investments, and the unspoken responsibility of continuing to be the family's emotional and financial backbone. After Richard's death, I threw myself into being even more present for my children. Benjamin, my oldest, had just started his architectural firm. Melissa, my middle child, was struggling with her marriage while raising twins, and Daniel, my youngest, was still finding his footing after college. They needed me, and I needed to be needed. When Benjamin mentioned he'd found the perfect property for his family but couldn't quite afford the down payment, I didn't hesitate. "Let me help," I said, writing a check that might have funded a comfortable European vacation. His gratitude seemed genuine then. Tight hugs, misty eyes, promises to repay me someday. Within months, Melissa's situation deteriorated. Her husband left, and suddenly, she faced losing her home. Again, I stepped in, this time arranging to make the monthly mortgage payments until she got back on her feet. Daniel's situation followed. A similar pattern, a startup idea that needed funding, then a house he couldn't quite afford in a neighborhood essential for networking. Before I knew it, I was making payments on 3 properties: Benjamin's Craftsman in Westport, Melissa's Colonial in Fairfield, and Daniel's modern townhouse in Stamford. I never formalized these arrangements with contracts. These were my children, after all. The understanding was implicit. I was helping them build stability, and they would care for me as I aged. At least, that's what I believed. Last year, I noticed subtle changes. My invitations to Sunday dinners were met with increasingly elaborate excuses. Phone calls became shorter, less frequent. When I did visit their homes I was paying for, I couldn't miss the exchanged glances when I mentioned a memory twice or struggled with a new smartphone feature. Still, nothing prepared me for that call 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I'd always hosted the holiday, transforming my dining room into a harvest sanctuary. My table extended with all its leaves could seat 20, and I prided myself on cooking. Everything from scratch. The turkey brined for days, cranberry sauce with orange zest, my mother's cornbread stuffing recipe that had survived 2 world wars and countless family disagreements. I was in my kitchen that morning, already planning the menu when Melissa called. Her voice had that particular tone, the one she'd used as a teenager when asking for something she knew I wouldn't want to give. "Mom," she said after our brief pleasantries, "we've been talking, Ben, Daniel, and I, and we thought this year we might try something different for Thanksgiving." "Different?" I repeated, my hand instinctively tightening around my coffee mug. "What kind of different?" "Well, we thought maybe we'd have it at Ben's place this year. His new kitchen renovation is finally done, and he's eager to show it off. The renovation I had contributed $12,000 toward, though she didn't mention that." "That sounds lovely," I said, swallowing my disappointment. "What time should I arrive? I'll bring the stuffing and pies, of course." The pause that followed lasted just long enough for me to know something was wrong. "Actually, Mom," Melissa continued, her voice dropping to that careful, measured tone people use when speaking to someone fragile. We were thinking of just having a younger gathering this year. The cousins want to stay up late and play games, and Ben's setting up that karaoke machine. You know how loud it gets. My kitchen suddenly seemed too warm, too bright. I'm not sure I understand, I said, though I was beginning to understand perfectly. Are you saying I'm not invited to Thanksgiving dinner? Another pause, then. It's not that you're not invited exactly. We just thought you might be more comfortable having a quiet dinner at your place. All the noise and chaos, Ben's kids, running around, the twins' friends dropping by. It gets overwhelming even for us. We worry it might be too much for you at your age. At my age? Those 3 words landed like stones. I see, I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. And have you discussed who will be making the cornbread stuffing? Or the cranberry sauce? Or managing the timing of the turkey so it doesn't dry out while the potatoes are mashing? Mom, Melissa sighed, we're all adults. We can handle a turkey. And honestly, we might try some new recipes this year. Gluten-free stuffing, maybe. The kids are more health-conscious these days. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us like a widening river. Mom, are you upset? I thought you'd be relieved not to have all that work. You're always exhausted after hosting. Exhausted but fulfilled. Tired but connected to my family. Drained but vital. No, not upset. I lied. Just surprised. But you're right. You're all adults. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. I paused, then added, by the way, how's the roof repair coming along? Did that contractor I recommended work out? The roof repair, another $15,000 I'd provided just last month when she'd called in tears about water damage. Oh, it's fine. All fixed, she said brightly, clearly relieved by my apparent acceptance and the change of subject. Thanks again for your help with that. We couldn't have managed without you. Couldn't have managed without my checkbook, I thought bitterly. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen island for nearly an hour, staring at nothing. The rejection wasn't just about a holiday dinner. It was the culmination of 100 small dismissals. The times my advice was politely acknowledged, then ignored. The family decisions made without my input. The conversations that stopped when I entered a room. I was financially essential, but socially expendable. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out all my financial records and created a detailed spreadsheet of every dollar I'd given my children in the past decade. The numbers were staggering. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Benjamin's mortgage, $2,400 monthly for 6 years. Melissa's, $3,100 monthly for nearly 8 years, plus various emergency expenses. Daniel's, $2,800 monthly for 4 years, along with the initial down payment of $120,000. None of these arrangements had end dates. None included repayment plans. They had simply become my perpetual responsibility. An extension of parenthood that had somehow never ended despite my children being in their 40s. I poured myself a rare second glass of wine and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront them or plead for inclusion. I wasn't going to guilt them with tears or angry accusations. Instead, I would simply stop being their financial safety net without being their mother. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Martin, who had been warning me for years about the unsustainability of my generosity. Eleanor, he said when I explained my plan, are you certain about this? It's going to cause quite a storm in the family. I'm certain, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. And I'd like to move quickly before I lose my nerve. Within days, the machinery was in motion. I contacted each of the mortgage lenders, informing them that I would be making the final payments the following month. I transferred ownership of the investment accounts I'd set up for emergencies back to my main portfolio. I updated my will with my attorney, restructuring how my estate would eventually be distributed, not eliminating my children, but ensuring my assets would be protected by trusts with specific conditions. Then I waited. Thanksgiving was still 2 weeks away, and I wondered if I would hear from any of them before the holiday. I didn't. Not a call, not a text asking if I was doing all right on my own. Not even Benjamin, who normally called on Sundays, reached out, so I made new plans. I accepted an invitation from my friend Judith to join her family for Thanksgiving in Vermont. I booked a spa treatment for the day before. I arranged for my mail and newspaper delivery to be held, small details that gave me immense satisfaction, knowing I was making choices solely for myself. The mortgage payment notifications reached my children within days of each other, approximately 1 week before Thanksgiving. Benjamin called first, his architect's precision apparently extending to his bill-paying schedule. "Mom," he began without preamble when I answered, "there's been some mistake with the mortgage payment. The bank says you've notified them you're discontinuing payments." "That's correct," I said, admiring the vibrant sunset from my porch swing. "I am discontinuing payments." Silence then. "I don't understand. Is there a problem with your accounts? Are you having financial difficulties?" The concern in his voice might have warmed me once. Now it just sounded like panic about his own situation. "No, Benjamin. My finances are in excellent order. I've simply decided that at my age," I couldn't resist emphasizing those words, "I should be more careful with my resources. Retirement can be so unpredictable, you know." "Mom, we had an arrangement," he said, his voice tightening. "Did we?" "I don't recall signing any documents to that effect. I've been helping you because I wanted to, and now I want to stop. I'm sure with your firm doing so well, you can manage the payments yourself." "This is completely out of nowhere. The holidays are coming up, the kids' winter activities all have fees due, and Claire just ordered new furniture for the living room." "The living room with the custom bay windows I paid to have installed last spring?" I interrupted, surprising myself with my sharpness. "That's not fair," he said. "You offered to help with those. You said you wanted the grandkids to have a nice view of the garden." "Yes, I did. And now I'm offering to stop helping. I'm sure you'll manage." I paused, then added, "By the way, I won't be alone on Thanksgiving after all. Judith invited me to Vermont with her family. Do give everyone my love at your younger gathering." I ended the call before he could respond, my heart pounding, but my resolve strengthening. Melissa's call came about 20 minutes later, her voice already tearful. "Mom, what's going on? Ben just called me freaking out about the mortgage payments, and then I checked my email and found the same notice from my bank." "Yes, I've decided to discontinue those payments," I said calmly. "It's been 8 years, Melissa. The arrangement was until you got back on your feet, if I recall correctly. But I'm a single mother. You know how expensive the twins' college applications are right now, and the property taxes in Fairfield are insane." "Indeed they are," I agreed. "Perhaps it's time to consider downsizing to something more manageable on your income." "Downsize? Leave Fairfield? The kids would have to change schools their senior year. How can you even suggest that?" I closed my eyes, remembering how many times I'd moved as a child because my own parents couldn't afford stability. How I'd promised myself my children would never know that uncertainty. How I'd worked alongside Richard to ensure we could provide them with opportunities we'd never had. "Life often presents us with difficult choices," I said. "I'm sorry if this causes you hardship, but my decision is final." "This is about Thanksgiving, isn't it?" she accused. "You're punishing us because we wanted one holiday without having to worry about you forgetting conversations or needing everything explained 3 times. Her words hit like a physical blow. So that was how they saw me now, not as their mother, their supporter, their champion, but as a burden. an elderly inconvenience, a slower, forgetful version of the woman who had once run their world. "This isn't about Thanksgiving," I said quietly. "This is about recognition, value, respect, things that shouldn't disappear just because I've grown older. You can't just cut us off without warning. That's financial abuse." I actually laughed at that. Interesting perspective. I'll be sure to mention it to my financial advisor when he congratulates me on finally establishing healthy boundaries. Daniel's call came last, late in the evening. Unlike his siblings, he didn't start with accusation or panic. "Mom," he said softly. "What's going on? Really?" Something in his tone nearly broke my resolve. Daniel had always been the perceptive one, the child who could sense the currents beneath surfaces. "I'm reclaiming my life," I said finally. "And my financial independence." "Because we hurt you," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." He sighed heavily. "The Thanksgiving thing was Melissa's idea, but Ben and I went along with it. We should have pushed back." "Yes, you should have," I agreed. "We can fix this. I'll call them right now. Tell them we're doing Thanksgiving at your place like always." "No," I interrupted. "I already have plans. And this isn't just about one holiday dinner, Daniel. This is about years of taking me for granted, of accepting my financial support while gradually excluding me from your lives except when it's convenient, of treating me like I'm somehow less valuable because I'm aging." "That's not how we see you," he protested. "Isn't it? When was the last time any of you asked for my advice, not just my checkbook? When did you stop seeing me as a person with something to contribute beyond money?" The silence that followed told me everything. "I'm not cutting you out of my life," I said more gently. "I'm just cutting the financial cords that have allowed you all to treat me as an ATM rather than your mother. We'll find a new way forward from here." After I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. There would be difficult conversations ahead, possibly even estrangement for a time. But for the first time since Richard died, I was putting myself first. Not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. The next morning, I received a group text from all 3 children requesting a family meeting that weekend. I agreed, suggesting Sunday brunch at a neutral location, the waterfront restaurant Richard and I had always loved. Then I called Judith and asked if I could extend my Thanksgiving visit to include a side trip to New York. I'd always wanted to see the Macy's parade in person, and suddenly it seemed absurd that I never had. "At our age," I told her with a smile in my voice, "we shouldn't wait to do the things we've always dreamed of." As I hung up, my gaze fell on a framed photo of Richard and me on our 40th anniversary. He was looking at me with such clear admiration, such unwavering respect. "I think you'd approve," I told his image. "It's time they remembered who I am. And who I am is not just a checkbook, not just an aging parent to be managed and appeased. I am Eleanor Winters, still vital, still valuable, and finally, truly, independent." Sunday arrived with unseasonable warmth and brilliant sunshine, as if the universe itself was encouraging me to stand firm in my resolution. I dressed with particular care that morning, a tailored navy blazer over a silk blouse, pearl earrings Richard had given me on our 30th anniversary, and the vintage Cartier watch that had been my mother's. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman of substance and dignity. Not a forgotten matriarch, but a force to be reckoned with. The Harborview restaurant buzzed with weekend energy when I arrived, deliberately 15 minutes early. I secured a corner, table overlooking the water, ordered a mimosa, and waited. Power resides with the person who arrives first, sets the stage, and appears unruffled. Richard had taught me that during his years as CEO. They arrived together, a united front, Benjamin in his designer casual wear that cost more than my first car, Melissa in a cream-colored ensemble that beautifully complemented her auburn hair, and Daniel in his standard tech entrepreneur uniform of expensive jeans and a blazer. Once, the sight of my 3 children together would have filled me with nothing but pride and joy. Today, I noted their collective tension with a detached curiosity. "Mother," Benjamin greeted me with a stiff kiss on the cheek. He'd reverted to the formal address, a sure sign he was upset. Melissa hugged me tightly, performing affection with the theatrical flair she'd perfected in high school drama club. Daniel simply squeezed my hand, his eyes searching mine with genuine concern. "Thank you all for coming," I said once they were seated. "Shall we order first? I find difficult conversations go better with good food." Their exchanged glances told me they'd planned to launch immediately into their grievances. I'd disrupted their script, and I intended to keep doing so. Over smoked salmon benedicts and avocado toast, we maintained surface-level pleasantries. Benjamin described his latest architectural project, Melissa mentioned the twins' college applications, and Daniel shared news about his company's expansion. I listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and behaved exactly as I always had, like a mother genuinely interested in her children's lives. It was Benjamin who finally broached the subject as our plates were being cleared. "Mother, we need to discuss your recent financial decisions." I smiled, dabbing my lips with the linen napkin. "Yes, I imagine we do. We don't understand why you've suddenly decided to withdraw support that we've all been counting on," he continued, his architect's precision with words failing to mask his frustration. "Suddenly?" I repeated, arching an eyebrow. "Benjamin, I've been paying your mortgage for 6 years. That hardly constitutes a sudden arrangement." "But there was no indication you planned to stop," Melissa interjected, leaning forward. "No warning, no discussion, just abrupt notices from the banks. I wasn't aware I needed to provide notice for discontinuing a voluntary financial gift," I replied calmly. "Was there an expiration date on my generosity that I missed?" Daniel winced slightly. At least one of them recognized the barb beneath my pleasant tone. "Mom, we all appreciate everything you've done," Benjamin said, adopting the patronizing tone I'd grown to detest. "But your timing is problematic. Property taxes are due, the holidays are approaching, and this kind of financial disruption—" "Disruption," I interrupted, setting down my mimosa. "Interesting word choice. Tell me, was it disruptive when Melissa informed me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving dinner because I'm too old? Was it disruptive when none of you called to check if I would be spending the holiday alone? Or is disruption only meaningful when it affects your bank accounts?" Silence fell over the table. Melissa's eyes widened, Benjamin shifted uncomfortably, and Daniel examined his coffee cup with sudden interest. "That's not fair," Melissa finally said, her voice smaller than before. "The Thanksgiving thing was a misunderstanding. We weren't trying to exclude you." "Please don't lie to me," I said quietly. "You've always been a terrible liar, even as a child. You told me quite clearly that the gathering would be better suited to younger people, and that at my age, I might find it overwhelming. Those were your exact words." Benjamin cleared his throat. "Mom, if this is some kind of revenge for a perceived slight—" "Perceived?" My laugh surprised even me with its sharpness. "There was nothing perceived about my exclusion, Benjamin. It was stated quite explicitly. But no, this isn't revenge. This is consequence." I looked at each of them in turn, these adults who had once been the center of my universe. "For years, I've subsidized your lifestyles without complaint. I've provided financial support well beyond what any parent should be expected to give adult children. And gradually, as you've grown more dependent on my money, you've grown less interested in my presence in your lives." "That's not true," Daniel protested, finally speaking up. "We love having you in our lives." "When was the last time any of you invited me to dinner without needing something from me?" I asked. "When did you last call just to chat, not to thank me for a check or ask for another favor?" Their silence was damning. I've been asking myself why I allowed this pattern to continue for so long, I continued, my voice softening. After your father died, I think I feared losing my connection to all of you. I worried that without something to offer, without being needed, I would fade from your lives completely. So I kept writing checks, kept solving problems, kept being the financial foundation so you would have reason to keep me around. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. Mom, that's not. It is, I said firmly. We all know it is. And last week, when you uninvited me from the family Thanksgiving, something finally clicked. I realized I'd created exactly what I feared most, relationships with my children based on utility rather than love and respect. I lifted my mimosa, took a deliberate sip, and continued. So yes, I've stopped paying your mortgages, not to punish you, but to restore balance. To see what our relationship looks like when it's not lubricated by my checkbook. Benjamin's jaw tightened. You make it sound like we've been using you. Haven't you? I held his gaze steadily. He looked away first. What exactly do you want from us? Melissa asked, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. We can't just suddenly afford these payments without completely restructuring our lives. I'm aware, I nodded, and I'm sorry for any hardship this causes. But the reality is, none of you are living within your means. You've been able to maintain lifestyles beyond your incomes because I've been subsidizing you. Perhaps it's time for some restructuring. So that's it? Benjamin's voice rose slightly. You're just cutting us off cold turkey because we wanted one Thanksgiving without having to accommodate. He stopped himself, but not quickly enough. Without having to accommodate me, I finished for him. Without having to speak more slowly, repeat yourselves, adjust your plans around my earlier bedtime. Without having to pretend you value my presence when you clearly find it burdensome. Daniel reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Mom, that's not how we feel. Isn't it? I withdrew my hand gently. Benjamin couldn't even finish the sentence, but we all know what he meant. You see me as an accommodation now, not a person. Certainly not as the woman who raised you, who built a life with your father that has afforded you privileges most people can only dream of. I signaled for the check, signing it quickly when it arrived. I've made my decision. It isn't up for negotiation. You're all capable adults with good jobs and numerous advantages. You'll figure out your finances. And what about our relationship? Melissa asked, her voice trembling slightly. Are you cutting that off too? The question struck deeper than she probably intended. For a moment, I saw my children as they once were. Benjamin constructing elaborate block towers that he refused to let anyone knock down. Melissa organizing neighborhood talent shows where she always claimed the starring role, Daniel following. Me around the garden asking why about every plant and insect. That depends entirely on you, I said more gently. I will always be your mother. I will always love you. But from now on, our relationship needs to be based on genuine desire for connection, not financial dependency. I stood, smoothing my blazer. I won't be available for the next 2 weeks. I'm spending Thanksgiving with Judith in Vermont, then we're going to New York to see the Macy's parade. I've always wanted to experience it in person. You're going to New York? Alone? Benjamin looked genuinely alarmed. With Judith, I corrected him. 2 capable septuagenarians enjoying the city. Try not to worry. We'll use the crosswalks and everything. His concern would have touched me once. Now it just felt patronizing. When you get back, Daniel said quietly, can we talk again? Just you and me? I studied his face, so much like Richard's, especially around the eyes. Always the peacemaker, my youngest. I'd like that, I said sincerely. Call me after the holiday. As I walked to my car afterward, my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Mom, I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. We should have handled it differently. Not, we shouldn't have excluded you. but we should have handled it differently. The distinction spoke volumes. I didn't respond immediately. Some lessons require time to sink in. The next 2 weeks unfolded like a revelation. Judith and I settled into her daughter's Vermont farmhouse for Thanksgiving, where I was treated not as an elderly burden but as an honored guest. Her son-in-law, a chef with a popular Burlington restaurant, actually sought my advice on perfecting his cornbread stuffing recipe. Her grandchildren, all in their 20s, asked thoughtful questions about my career and travels. No one spoke slowly or exchanged knowing glances when I mentioned a memory from decades past. On Thanksgiving morning, I helped in the kitchen without taking over, enjoying the collaborative spirit. When dinner was served, Judith's daughter insisted I take the seat of honor at the head of the table. To our guest, she raised her glass, who brings wisdom, grace, and the best cranberry sauce recipe I've ever tasted. Their genuine warmth brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This was what family should feel like, a place where age brought respect, not dismissal. I texted each of my children a simple, "Happy Thanksgiving" that evening, receiving prompt but stilted responses from all three. No one mentioned their younger gathering, and I didn't ask. New York with Judith was a revelation. Of a different sort. We checked into a boutique hotel in Chelsea, bought tickets to 2 Broadway shows, and made reservations at restaurants we'd read about in food magazines. We navigated the subway without incident, joined a walking tour of architectural landmarks that Benjamin would have appreciated, and stood among the crowds at the Macy's parade, cheering like schoolgirls when the giant balloons floated past. "I can't believe I waited 72 years to do this," I told Judith as we sipped hot chocolate afterward, our faces flushed with cold and excitement. "Better late than never," she replied with the grin that had first drawn me to her in our college days. "What else is on your bucket list, Eleanor?" I considered the question seriously. I've never seen the Northern Lights. Richard and I always talked about going to Iceland, but there was never enough time with the children and his work. "February," she said decisively. "The viewing is supposed to be excellent then. I'll book it when we get home." Just like that, another adventure was planned, another horizon expanded. Without the weight of my children's mortgages, without the constant underlying anxiety about their financial needs, I felt 20 years younger, free to consider my own dreams, my own remaining time. "We should start a group," Judith mused as we wandered through the Metropolitan Museum of Art on our final day. "Women our age who are reclaiming their lives. There must be thousands of us out there, figuring out who we are beyond mother, wife, supporter." "The Reimagined," I suggested, only half joking. For women who thought they were entering the epilogue but discovered it's actually a new chapter. We laughed, but the idea took root. By the time our train pulled back into Lakeside Station, we had sketched the outlines of a club. Monthly meetings, rotating hostesses, speakers on topics from financial independence to travel adventures designed for older women. Daniel was waiting at the station, leaning against his Tesla, looking simultaneously boyish and careworn. My heart squeezed at the sight of him. No matter what boundaries I set, these were still my children, still the people I had loved most in the world for decades. "Welcome home," he said, giving me a genuine hug before helping with my luggage. "How was New York?" "Exhilarating," I replied honestly. "Judith and I are already planning a trip to Iceland in February to see the Northern Lights." He blinked, in surprise, then smiled. "That sounds amazing, Mom. I want to hear all about your plans." As he drove me home, he filled me in on the Thanksgiving gathering. "It was a disaster," he admitted ruefully. "Ben burned the turkey, Melissa forgot half the side dishes, and the kids spent the whole time complaining that it wasn't as good as Grandma's Thanksgiving. By dessert, everyone was acknowledging we'd made a huge mistake. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction, though I kept my expression neutral. Holidays take practice. I said diplomatically. He glanced at me, then back at the road. We missed you, all of us. Even Ben, though he's too stubborn to say it. I appreciate that, I said, leaving it at that. At my house, he carried my bags inside and hesitated in the foyer. Can we have that talk now? I know you just got back, but… Of course, I gestured toward the living room. Would you like some tea? Over Earl Grey and the shortbread. Cookies I'd brought back from a Manhattan bakery. Daniel finally opened up. I've been thinking a lot about what you said at brunch. About using you for financial support while gradually excluding you from our lives. I waited, giving him space to continue. I think you're right, he admitted, looking down at his hands, Richard's hands, with the same long, elegant fingers. We've taken you for granted. Accepted every check, every bill payment, every loan that we all knew wasn't really a loan. And somehow, along the way, we stopped seeing you as a person with your own life and dreams. You became… I don't know. An ATM with emotional complications, I supplied. He winced. That's harsh, but not entirely wrong. What about your mortgage? I asked, changing direction. Have you figured out a solution? He nodded. I've listed the townhouse. It's more space than I need anyway, and with the market in Stamford, I should be able to sell at a profit. I'm looking at condos closer to my office, smaller, but actually more practical for my lifestyle. I felt a surge of pride. Of my 3 children, Daniel had always been the most pragmatic, the quickest to adjust course when necessary. I'm also talking to Ben and Melissa, he continued, trying to help them see that this isn't about punishment, it's about recalibration. Ben's furious, you know how he gets, but I think Melissa is starting to understand. And how do you feel? I asked quietly. He considered this for a long moment. Honestly? Embarrassed. I'm 42 years old, Mom. I run a successful tech company. I should have been handling my own mortgage years ago. He met my eyes directly. I'm sorry for taking advantage of your generosity. And I'm even more sorry for not valuing your presence in my life the way I should have. The sincere contrition in his voice brought tears to my eyes, but I blinked them away. This moment wasn't about my emotional validation. It was about my son's growth. Thank you for that, I said simply. It means a great deal to hear you say it. So, where do we go from here? He asked, setting down his teacup. How do we rebuild? I considered my answer carefully. One genuine interaction at a time, I suppose, without financial entanglement clouding the waters. I'd like regular dinners. Not because anyone needs anything, but because we enjoy each other's company. I'd like to hear about your work without feeling like the conversation is a prelude to a request for money. I'd like to be part of family gatherings because my presence is valued, not tolerated. He nodded slowly. That sounds healthy and long overdue. Before he left, he hugged me tightly. I love you, Mom. Not your money, not what you can do for me. You. I held him close, savoring the moment. I love you too. Always have. Always will. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months, perhaps years. One bridge beginning to mend, 2 more to go. Benjamin proved more difficult, as I'd expected. His pride had always been both his strength and his weakness. A week passed without a word from him, then 2. Melissa called twice, once to ask if I'd like to have lunch. Just us, no agenda. And once to nervously inquire if I might be willing to help with the twins' college application essays. They value your perspective, Mom, and your writing skills are better than mine. I agreed to both, pleased that she was making an effort, even if the second request still involved a form of assistance. Progress, not perfection. 3 weeks after my return from New York, I was pruning my winter garden when a familiar Mercedes pulled into my driveway. Benjamin sat in the driver's seat for nearly 5 minutes before finally emerging, his posture stiff, his expression guarded. Benjamin, I greeted him from beside my prized hydrangea bushes. "This is a surprise." "Mother," he nodded, approaching with his hands thrust deep in his coat pockets. "Your garden looks nice." I nearly smiled at the awkward compliment. Benjamin had never shown the slightest interest in my gardening. "Thank you. Would you like to come inside? It's getting chilly out here." In my kitchen, I made coffee while he sat rigidly at the counter, declining my offer of pastries or sandwiches. When I finally sat across from him, cradling my mug, he cleared his throat several times before speaking. "I've sold the boat," he said abruptly. Of all the openings I'd imagined, this wasn't one of them. The 30-foot sailboat had been his pride and joy, purchased 4 years ago at a price that had made me wince even in my most generous days. "I see," I said carefully. "Was that difficult for you?" He shrugged, attempting nonchalance, but not quite achieving it. "It was an unnecessary luxury. Used it maybe 10 times a year, but the slip fees and maintenance were astronomical." I waited, sensing there was more coming. "Claire and I have also put the house on the market," he continued, staring into his untouched coffee. "We found a smaller place, still in a good school district for the kids, but more aligned with what we can actually afford on our own." My heart ached a little at the wounded pride in his voice, but I also felt a flicker of admiration. Benjamin had always been the most status-conscious of my children, the most concerned with appearances and prestige. These decisions couldn't have been easy for him. "That sounds like a sensible decision," I said, neither praising nor criticizing. He finally looked up at me, his eyes, so like mine, filled with conflicted emotions. "You know, when you first cut off the mortgage payments, I was furious. I thought you were being vindictive, punishing us over something trivial." "Excluding me from the family Thanksgiving wasn't trivial to me," I pointed out gently. He had the grace to look ashamed. "I know that now. But at the time, I was so focused on the financial impact, I couldn't see anything else." "And now?" Benjamin sighed deeply. "Now I realize we've been living beyond our means for years, floating on your generosity. It wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't dignified for any of us." He straightened his shoulders, meeting my gaze directly. "I'm still not happy about how this happened. The timing has been difficult, and I wish you'd given us some warning. But I understand why you did it." It wasn't quite an apology, but from Benjamin, it was significant. An acknowledgement of understanding was as close to contrition as his pride would currently allow. "Thank you for telling me," I said sincerely. "I know these adjustments can't be easy." He grimaced. "Claire's not thrilled about downsizing. The kids are complaining about potentially changing schools. But we'll manage." We talked a while longer, our conversation gradually shifting to more neutral topics. His current architectural projects, Claire's plan to return to part-time work now that their youngest was in middle school, my trip to New York with Judith. By the time he left, some of the stiffness had gone out of his posture, some of the defensiveness from his voice. At the door, he hesitated, then said gruffly, "We're doing Christmas at the house before we move. The whole family. We'd like you to come if you're willing." "I'd like that," I said, smiling genuinely. Another bridge, beginning to mend. As winter settled over Lakeside, I found myself busier than I'd been in years, but with activities of my own choosing. Judith and I launched our group. The Reimagined had stuck, with 12 women from our extended social circle, all over 65, all seeking connection and purpose beyond traditional grandmother roles. We met monthly in each other's homes, sharing resources, planning excursions, and gradually building a community of women who refused to fade quietly into the background of their families' lives. Iceland plans solidified for February. I booked a photography workshop in Arizona for March, something I'd always wanted to try. I volunteered at the botanical gardens, offering my expertise on native plantings. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected while focusing so intensely on my children's needs. And gradually, cautiously, my relationship with my children began to transform. Melissa invited me to Sunday dinners. Not every week, but regularly. We worked together on the twins' college essays, and when both were accepted to excellent schools, she insisted I join them for the celebration dinner. "They wouldn't have gotten in without your help," she said, and I detected genuine gratitude rather than perfunctory acknowledgement. Daniel kept his word about selling the townhouse, moving into a sleek downtown condo that suited his bachelor lifestyle much better. He invited me to the housewarming, proudly showing me around a space that reflected his personality rather than aspirational living. "No mortgage on this one," he told me with a wink. "Paid cash with the profit from the townhouse sale and some company stock." Even Benjamin gradually softened. Their new home was indeed smaller, but was thoughtfully designed. He was an architect after all, and felt warmer, more lived in than their showcase of a house ever had. Claire confided one evening, "It's actually a relief. I was always afraid. To let the kids really play in the other house, everything was so perfect and expensive. This feels like a home, not a museum." Christmas arrived with a fresh blanket of snow, and for the first time in years, no financial stress on my part. No last-minute calls about unexpected expenses, no quietly transferred funds to cover lavish gifts. I bought thoughtful presents. For everyone, but nothing extravagant. My children did the same. As we gathered around Benjamin's tree, possibly the last Christmas in that house before their move, I looked at my family with clear eyes. Imperfect, still learning, but trying. The dynamics had shifted, power had rebalanced, and in the process, something healthier had begun to emerge. After dinner, as the grandchildren played with their new gifts and the adults sipped eggnog by the fire, Melissa sat beside me on the sofa. "Mom," she said quietly, "we're planning next year's Thanksgiving. We'd like you to host again, if you're willing." "Nobody does it like you." I smiled, hearing the unspoken apology in her invitation. "I'd like that." And, she added, a hint of her old mischievousness returning, "If you could start teaching me your recipes, that would be great. I completely butchered the cornbread. Stuffing this year?" "Of course," I agreed. "Though I hear you might need to compete with Judith's son-in-law now. He's quite proud of his version." She laughed, then grew serious again. "I'm sorry, Mom, for taking you for granted, for making you feel less than. You're not too old for anything." I squeezed her hand, my heart full. "No," I agreed, watching my family around me. Not perfect, but present. Not dependent, but connected. I'm exactly the right age for everything that matters. February arrived with biting winds and pristine snowfall that transformed Lakeside into a winter postcard. As Judith and I finalized preparations for our Iceland trip, my phone rang with an unexpected caller, Claire, Benjamin's wife. We had always maintained a cordial relationship, but never particularly close. She had always seemed slightly intimidated by me, perhaps viewing me more as a benefactor than a mother-in-law. "Eleanor," she began, her voice carrying an unusual hesitancy. "I wonder if we might have coffee tomorrow. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Intrigued, I agreed to meet her at the small French bakery downtown. I arrived the next day to find her already seated in a corner booth, 2 steaming mugs before her and a plate of almond croissants between them. "I remembered these are your favorite," she said, gesturing to the pastries. "Benjamin mentioned it once." The thoughtful gesture surprised me. In all our years of family gatherings, I couldn't recall Claire ever making such a specific effort to please me. "Thank you," I said, settling across from her. "That was very considerate." She fidgeted with her napkin, clearly nervous. "Eleanor, I wanted to speak with you privately without Benjamin, about the house situation." I kept my expression neutral, though internally I braced myself. Was this to be a plea for financial rescue? A complaint about the lifestyle changes they'd been forced to make? "I owe you an apology," she said instead, catching me completely off guard. "For years I've gone along with the family's treatment of you, and it wasn't right." I sipped my coffee, giving her space to continue. "When Benjamin and I first got married, I was overwhelmed by your family's wealth," she admitted. "My parents were teachers, comfortable but certainly not affluent. Suddenly, I was part of this world where houses in exclusive neighborhoods were given as gifts, where financial problems disappeared with a phone call to you." I nodded, understanding. Claire had come from a solid middle-class background, thrust into Benjamin's expectations of affluence. At first, I tried to be sensible about money. But Benjamin, she sighed. He grew up with certain expectations. The right address, the right schools, the right appearances. And gradually, I stopped resisting. It was easier to accept your help than to fight about budgets constantly. She broke off a piece of croissant but didn't eat it, just crumbled it between her fingers. The boat was the breaking point for me. I begged him not to buy it. We argued for weeks. Then suddenly he came home and announced you'd agreed to increase your contribution to our mortgage, freeing up the cash flow for the boat payments. Felt a flush of shame, remembering that conversation. Benjamin had approached it cleverly, talking about rising property taxes and increased costs for the children's activities. I'd agreed to the additional support without question, never suspecting it was to finance a luxury purchase. I should have put my foot down, Claire continued. But by then, it felt like fighting a losing battle. If I insisted on financial responsibility, I was the villain. You were the fairy godmother who made everything possible. I enabled him, I acknowledged quietly. I didn't mean to undermine your position, Claire. She shook her head. You were being generous. Benjamin was being manipulative, and I was being cowardly by not standing firmer. She finally met my eyes directly. When you stopped the payments, I was actually relieved beneath the panic. It forced the conversation we should have had years ago. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Benjamin didn't present it that way. Claire laughed, a short, sharp sound. No, I imagine he didn't. His pride was wounded. But once we got past the initial shock and started really looking at our finances, it was like waking up from a fog. We've been living in a fantasy funded by you, building a lifestyle that required your constant subsidy. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. The new house is a clean slate for us. No parental subsidy, no financial smoke and mirrors. Just what we can genuinely afford on our incomes. She smiled ruefully. And you know what? The kids are actually excited about having bedroom sizes that will force them to keep things tidier. Benjamin is rediscovering his creative roots with the challenge of maximizing a smaller space. And I don't wake up every morning with this knot of anxiety about maintaining appearances we can't afford. I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Concern that I'd damaged my grandchildren's stability. Fear that Benjamin's family would suffer for my boundary setting. I'm happy to hear that, I said sincerely. I never wanted to cause hardship, but I needed to restore balance. You did the right thing, Claire said firmly. I know Benjamin is still adjusting. His pride runs deep, but this change has been healthy for our marriage. We're having real conversations about priorities, values, what we want to model for our children. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you for forcing us to grow up, even if we resisted at first. As I drove home, I reflected on Claire's words. The narrative I'd constructed, that I was punishing my children by withdrawing support, shifted subtly in my mind. Perhaps what I'd done wasn't punitive at all, but rather the greatest gift I could have given them. The opportunity to stand completely on their own feet, to build lives scaled to their actual resources rather than my supplementary ones. The Realization brought a lightness to my step as I continued preparations for Iceland. Judith and I had booked a specialized tour for the Northern Lights, small group, expert guides, accommodations in glass-roofed cabins that would allow us to potentially see the aurora borealis from our beds if the weather cooperated. "Have you ever been this excited about a trip?" Judith asked as we shopped for appropriate cold weather gear at the outdoor equipment store in town. I considered the question seriously. Not since Richard and I went to the Galapagos for our 35th anniversary, I realized. That was the last time I traveled purely for myself, not revolving around family obligations or the children's schedules. "Well then," Judith grinned, holding up a particularly technologically advanced pair of insulated gloves, "we'd better make this one count." The trip exceeded every expectation. Iceland in February was indeed brutally cold, but equipped with proper layers and the exhilaration of adventure we barely noticed. Our small tour group consisted of 12 travelers, primarily couples in their 50s and 60s, plus one father-daughter pair and another solo woman about our age named Marion, a retired judge from Oregon who quickly became our third musketeer. On our third night, the skies finally cleared and the aurora made its appearance, rippling curtains of green and purple light dancing across the black canvas of night. Our entire group stood outside in reverent silence, necks craned upward, mittened hands clutching hot drinks, as the lights shimmered and twisted above us. "I've waited my entire life for this," I whispered, tears freezing on my cheeks. "Worth every minute of the wait," Judith agreed, her voice thick with emotion. In that moment, I felt Richard's presence acutely, as if he were standing beside me sharing the wonder. I could almost hear his voice. "See, Ellie, the world still has magic to show you." The remainder of the trip passed in a blur of stunning landscapes, delicious meals, and deep conversations with our fellow travelers. By the time we returned to Connecticut, Marion had been incorporated into our reimagined group via Zoom, and the three of us had already begun planning a summer trip to the Cotswolds in England. I arrived home to find my house spotless, and a vase of fresh flowers on the kitchen counter. A note in Daniel's handwriting read, "Welcome back, world traveler. Thought you might appreciate coming home to a clean house and no chores. Dinner at my place this weekend? Want to hear all about Iceland? Love you." The gesture brought tears to my eyes. Not because he'd cleaned my house, though that was certainly thoughtful, but because he'd referred to me as a world traveler, acknowledging and celebrating this new dimension of my identity rather than expressing concern or disapproval. I was barely unpacked when Melissa called, her voice brimming with excitement. "Mom, the twins both got scholarships. NYU for Emma and Boston University for Ethan." "That's wonderful," I exclaimed, genuinely thrilled for my grandchildren. Both were bright, hard-working students who deserved recognition. "We need to celebrate," she continued. "I was thinking a family dinner next weekend. Everyone's available Saturday." "I'd love that," I agreed. "My place or yours?" "Actually," she hesitated momentarily, "I was hoping we could do it at Pellegrino's. On me," she added, quickly. "I just got a raise at work and I want to treat everyone." I felt a surge of pride. Melissa had returned to full-time work at her marketing firm about 5 years earlier, but this was the first time she'd ever suggested hosting a family celebration at her own expense. "That sounds perfect," I said warmly. The celebration dinner was everything a family gathering should be: joyful, relaxed, centered on genuine accomplishment rather than materialism. Watching my grandchildren glow with pride as their mother toasted their achievements, I felt a profound gratitude for how our family dynamics were evolving. Benjamin and Claire arrived slightly late, apologizing for the delay. "House showings ran long," Benjamin explained. "We have 2 serious offers already." "That's wonderful," I said. "The market must be stronger than you expected." "It's not just the market," Claire said, exchanging a significant glance with her husband. "Benjamin's design touches command a premium. The real estate agent said she's never seen a home where the owner's architectural expertise added so much value. Benjamin actually blushed at the compliment, a sight I hadn't witnessed since he was a boy. It's bittersweet, he admitted. I put a lot of myself into that house, but I'm excited about the new project too. Throughout dinner, I observed my children with new eyes. Benjamin spoke animatedly about the design challenges of their smaller home, his creative energy visibly rekindled. Melissa shared details about her promotion with quiet confidence, no longer diminishing her professional accomplishments in family settings. Daniel described a mentoring program he'd started at his company, revealing a depth of leadership I hadn't fully appreciated before. They were beginning to blossom into their full potential without the shelter and shadow of my financial canopy. As coffee and dessert arrived, Emma, the more outspoken of the twins, suddenly addressed me directly. "Grandma, we wanted to thank you for helping with our application essays. Dad says you're the reason our personal statements stood out." I glanced at Benjamin in surprise. He nodded, a sheepish smile playing at his lips. "You've always had a way with words, Mother. I should have acknowledged your help more explicitly." "It was my pleasure," I said, touched by the recognition. "You both wrote about meaningful experiences authentically. That's what makes a personal statement effective." "Actually," Ethan said, "we were wondering if you might help us with something else. We have to choose freshman seminars soon, and we're both overthinking it." "I'd be happy to give my input," I offered. "Great," Emma beamed. "Can we come over next week? We can bring lunch. There's this new Vietnamese place we want to try." The casual suggestion that they would bring food to me, that they wanted my advice without prompting from their parents, felt like a significant milestone. My grandchildren were seeing me as a person with valuable perspectives, not just as an elderly matriarch to be dutifully visited. The conversation flowed naturally to my Iceland adventure, with everyone listening attentively as I described the northern lights and the otherworldly landscapes. I shared photos from my phone, delighting in their genuine interest and questions. "Mom, you look so happy in these pictures," Melissa observed. "I don't think I've seen you this animated in years." "I am happy," I confirmed. "Happier than I've been since your father died, honestly." As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Benjamin pulled me aside. "Mother, I have a favor to ask. It's not financial," he added quickly, noting my expression. "It's about Dad's tools." Richard had maintained an impressive collection of woodworking, tools in his workshop behind the garage. After his death, I'd carefully preserved everything, unable to part with these tangible connections to him, even though I had no personal interest in woodworking. "I've been thinking about taking up some of his hobbies," Benjamin continued, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "The new house has a small outbuilding that would make a perfect workshop. I thought maybe I could use some of Dad's tools? Not take them," he clarified hastily. "Just borrow them. Maybe get some guidance from you on which ones were his favorites." The request touched me deeply. Benjamin had always been the child least interested in Richard's woodworking passion, preferring the clean lines of architectural drawings to the sawdust and imperfections of handcrafted wood. "I think your father would love knowing his tools were being used again," I said softly. "Come by tomorrow afternoon. I'll show you everything." The next day, Benjamin arrived precisely at 2, dressed in casual clothes I rarely saw him wear: jeans, a flannel shirt, work boots. Together, we unlocked the workshop, the scent of wood and machine oil still lingering years after Richard's last project. "I'd forgotten how peaceful it feels in here," Benjamin said, running his fingers along the workbench where his father had shaped countless pieces. He called it his thinking room, I recalled. Said the rhythm of working with his hands freed his mind to solve problems his brain alone couldn't tackle. Benjamin nodded slowly. "I could use some of that wisdom right now." I showed him the careful organization system Richard had developed, the custom storage solutions he'd built for specialized tools. As Benjamin examined each piece, asking questions about their use and Richard's preferences, I realized we were having the most genuine conversation we'd shared in years, perhaps ever. He tried to interest you in woodworking when you were young, I remembered. You weren't very receptive. Benjamin laughed ruefully. I was too busy trying to prove I was sophisticated. Woodworking seemed so ordinary compared to the architectural masterpieces I was studying. He picked up a hand-carved jewelry box Richard had made for our anniversary. I didn't understand then that there's profound beauty in creating something tangible with your own hands. He ran his fingers over the dovetail joints, the perfectly smooth finish. The house we're downsizing to, it needs work. Not major renovations, but character, personal touches. I thought maybe instead of hiring everything out, I could try making some built-ins myself. Connect with Dad's legacy while building something new for my family. I blinked back tears. He would have loved that, Benjamin. Truly. As we cataloged which tools he would borrow first, Benjamin suddenly said, I've been meaning to tell you, we're backing out of the country club membership. The prestigious Lakeside Country Club had been Benjamin's pride for years, an exclusive membership he'd leveraged for both social status and client connections. Are you sure that's wise for your business? I asked carefully. He shrugged. I've been tracking where my clients actually come from for the past few months. Less than 15% originated through club connections, and those tended to be the most demanding clients with the smallest budgets. He picked up a vintage level, testing its accuracy. Claire and I realized we were spending over $20,000 a year for a membership we used mainly to impress others, not because we genuinely enjoyed it. That's quite an insight, I observed. The truth is, he continued, selecting a set of chisels, I've been living someone else's idea of success. The prestigious address, the boat, the club membership, none of it made me happy. It just kept me on a hamster wheel of earning and spending. I thought of Richard, who had achieved genuine financial success, but had always maintained perspective about money's proper place in a well-lived life. Your father would approve of your recalibration. Benjamin nodded, a weight visibly lifting from his shoulders. I'm starting to think I might actually enjoy this next chapter more than the last. 1. Less pressure, more substance. As he left with the first batch of tools carefully loaded in his car, Benjamin hugged me. A real embrace, not the perfunctory gesture he'd offered in recent years. Thank you, Mother. Not just for the tools, for everything. I stood in the driveway watching him drive away, marveling at how setting boundaries had paradoxically brought us closer than years of financial support ever had. The following week brought another unexpected development when Daniel invited me to tour his company headquarters. In all the years since he'd founded his tech startup, I'd never visited his workplace, despite its location only 30 minutes from my home. I realized you've never seen what I actually do, he explained as he guided me through the modern office space. You've supported my career in countless ways, but I've never properly shared this part of my life with you. The tour was fascinating, not just for seeing the innovative workspace he'd created, but for observing how his employees responded to him. There was genuine respect in their interactions, a warmth that spoke to his skills as a leader, not just an entrepreneur. In his office afterward, over coffee from the gourmet kitchen he'd installed for his team, Daniel broached a subject I hadn't expected. Mom, would you consider joining our company's advisory board? We've been expanding our services to include digital solutions for older adults, and frankly, we need perspective from sharp, tech-savvy seniors who can cut through the assumptions younger team members make. I nearly choked on my coffee. Me? On a tech company advisory board? Don't sell yourself short, he said seriously. You navigate technology better than most people your age, but you also have invaluable perspective on what works intuitively and what doesn't. Plus, you have decades of business experience from working with Dad. He leaned forward, eyes alight with genuine enthusiasm. This isn't charity or nepotism, Mom. It's a legitimate business need, and you're genuinely qualified. We'd pay standard advisory board compensation, of course. The offer was so unexpected that I asked for time to consider it. But as I drove home, I felt a flutter of excitement at the prospect of contributing meaningful insights to a growing company, of having my experience valued professionally, not just as a family matriarch. I called Judith that evening to discuss the opportunity. "Absolutely do it," she advised without hesitation. "This is exactly what our reimagined group is about, finding new ways to engage our experience and wisdom in a world that often dismisses older women." After careful consideration, I accepted Daniel's offer, attending my first advisory board meeting the following month. To my delight, I found I had genuine contributions to make, identifying usability issues younger developers had missed, suggesting features that would appeal to my demographic, challenging assumptions about how seniors interact with technology. "You were the star of the meeting," Daniel told me afterward, beaming with pride that now flowed from son to mother rather than the reverse. "The product team can't wait to implement your suggestions." For the first time in years, I felt professionally relevant, not as Richard's widow or as the financial backbone of my children's lives, but as a person with valuable skills and perspectives of my own. Spring arrived with gentle determination, awakening my garden from its winter slumber. As I tended to the emerging bulbs and pruned the roses for new growth, I reflected on the remarkable transformation our family had undergone in just a few months. Melissa had fully embraced her career resurgence, her increased salary now allowing her to cover all her expenses independently. The twins were preparing for college with scholarships that significantly reduced the financial burden. She'd even begun dating again, cautiously, selectively, after years of focusing solely on parenting and survival. Benjamin and Claire had completed their move to the smaller but more sensible home, furnishing it thoughtfully with quality pieces they truly cherished, rather than the status symbols that had filled their previous residence. Benjamin had already completed his first woodworking projects, simple floating shelves and a window seat, with Richard's tools. The pride in his voice when he sent me photos was palpable. Daniel's company was thriving, and my role on the advisory board had expanded to include regular focus groups with seniors in the community, an initiative that had already improved their products and opened new market segments. He'd recently started seeing someone, a doctor he'd met through a medical technology collaboration, and had invited me to meet her, a step he'd rarely taken in previous relationships. My own life had expanded in ways I could never have anticipated. The reimagined group had grown to 24 members, including women from 3 neighboring towns who'd heard about our activities. We'd established a monthly speakers series at the library, focusing on topics relevant to women reclaiming independence in their senior years. Judith, Marion, and I had confirmed our Cotswolds plans for July and were researching a potential winter trip to New Zealand. One evening in late April, as I sat on my porch swing enjoying the lengthening days, Melissa arrived unexpectedly, carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "The twins are at their father's for the weekend," she explained, settling beside me. "I thought we might enjoy some mother-daughter time." We sipped our wine in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I've been thinking a lot about last Thanksgiving," she said finally, "about how callously I hurt you." "That's past now," I assured her. She shook her head. "It needs to be acknowledged properly. What I did, what we all did, was cruel. We excluded you because of your age, as if that somehow diminished your value or your right to be part of family celebrations." I listened, giving her space to continue. "I've been asking myself why we did that," she continued, swirling the wine in her glass. "And I think, for me at least, it was fear." "Fear?" I echoed, surprised. "Of what?" "Of time, of mortality, of the reminder that youth isn't permanent." She sighed deeply. When I looked at you, I wasn't seeing you clearly. I was seeing my own anxieties about aging, about becoming irrelevant or invisible. The insight struck me deeply. I had interpreted their exclusion as rejection, but perhaps it had been more complex. A misguided attempt to distance themselves from reminders of life's inevitable progression. The irony, I said gently, is that by trying to separate yourself from aging, you miss the wisdom that comes with it, the perspective, the freedom. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I see that now. Watching you these past few months, traveling, starting new projects, making new friends. You're more vibrant than I am most days. Age hasn't diminished you. It's refined you. I reached over and squeezed her hand. It's not always easy. I have my moments of grief for lost youth, for your father, for time passing too quickly. But I've learned there's a richness to this stage of life that I never expected. I want to learn from you, she said simply. Not just about managing finances or cooking Thanksgiving dinner, but about living courageously at every age. As darkness settled around us and the first stars appeared, we talked more openly than we had in years, about her fears as her children prepared to leave home, about my adjustment to life without Richard, about relationships and careers and dreams, deferred and reclaimed. When she finally rose to leave, she embraced me tightly. Thank you for not giving up on us, Mom, even when we gave you every reason to. I will never give up on any of you, I assured her. But I won't diminish myself to keep you comfortable, either. She smiled through her tears. I wouldn't want you to. The real you, strong, independent, occasionally formidable, is exactly the mother I need, and the grandmother the twins need, and the woman this world needs. As I watched her drive away, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the painful but transformative journey we'd undertaken. By withdrawing financial support, I had ultimately given my children something far more valuable: the opportunity to discover their own strength, their true priorities, and a more authentic relationship with me. The mortgage payments I'd canceled had purchased something money never could: genuine respect, hard-won independence, and family bonds based on love rather than obligation. Summer arrived with an exuberance that seemed to mirror my own renewed spirit. My gardens flourished under attentive care. The advisory board position at Daniel's company became increasingly fulfilling, and our reimagined group had grown so popular, we'd had to move our meetings to the community center to accommodate everyone. One particularly warm June morning, as I sat on my patio reviewing materials for our upcoming Cotswolds trip, my phone rang with a call from Benjamin's son, my 17-year-old grandson, Jason. Grandma? His voice carried an unusual hesitancy. Can I come over today? There's something I want to talk to you about. Of course, I replied, surprised but pleased. While I'd always been close with my grandchildren, they rarely sought me out independently for conversations. How about lunch? I can make those turkey avocado wraps you like. That would be great, he said, sounding relieved. Is noon okay? Jason arrived precisely at 12, a punctuality he'd inherited from his father. He'd shot up several inches. Since Christmas, his lanky frame still adjusting to its new height. His father's architectural precision combined with Claire's artistic sensibility had produced a thoughtful young man with an eye for beauty and detail. Over lunch on the patio, we caught up on his final weeks of junior year, his summer job at the local art supply store, and his excitement about visiting colleges in the fall. He spoke animatedly about everything except whatever had prompted his visit. Finally, as we finished our wraps, I decided to gently prompt him. While I always enjoy your company, Jason, I suspect there was something specific you wanted to discuss? He set down his water glass, suddenly looking younger than his 17 years. Yeah, it's about college, actually, and Dad, and money. I nodded encouragingly but remained silent, giving him space to continue at his own pace. So you know Dad and Mom have been really different since they moved to the new house, right? Like they talk about budgets now and priorities and stuff. He traced a pattern on the tablecloth with his finger. They've been having all these family meetings about finances, being super transparent about what things cost and what we can afford. That sounds healthy, I observed. It is, he agreed. Weird at first, but good. Anyway, they sat me down last week to talk about college costs. They showed me exactly what they've saved, what they can contribute, and what I'd need to cover, with scholarships or loans. I kept my expression neutral, though internally I wondered if Benjamin was being unnecessarily harsh. He and Claire should have enough resources for a reasonable college contribution, even without my assistance. The thing is, Jason continued, Dad was really clear that while they can cover about 70% of a state school, they can't swing a private university unless I get serious scholarship money. Which is fair, I totally get it. He hesitated, took a deep breath and plunged forward. But here's the thing, Grandma. My dream school is RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. Their architecture program is amazing, especially for someone like me who's interested in the intersection of design and environmental sustainability. My heart warmed at the passion in his voice. This wasn't a passing teenage fancy, but a well-researched aspiration. It's also one of the most expensive schools in the country, he acknowledged. Like $76,000 a year expensive. Dad says even if I get partial scholarships, the gap would be too big for them to cover. I could see where this was heading and braced myself for what I suspected would be a request for financial support, a test of the boundaries I'd established. So, yesterday, I told Dad I was thinking of coming to talk to you about it. Jason looked up, meeting my eyes directly. And Grandma? He got really upset. Not angry, but intense. He said I absolutely could not ask you for money for college, that the family had taken advantage of your generosity for too long, and that it would be disrespectful for me to try to continue that pattern. This was not what I had expected at all. I felt a surge of pride in Benjamin's stance, even as I wondered about Jason's reaction. How did that make you feel? I asked. Carefully. Confused at first, he admitted. Then kind of proud of Dad? Like he was taking a moral stand even though it might mean I can't go to my dream school. Jason straightened his shoulders. But that's not why I'm here. I didn't come to ask you for money. You didn't. I couldn't help the surprise in my voice. He shook his head firmly. No, I came to ask you for advice about how to make this work on my own. Dad said you put yourself through college before you met Grandpa, that you worked and got scholarships and made it happen without family money. I figured if anyone would know how to approach this challenge creatively, it would be you. Emotion. Closed my throat momentarily. This young man, this child of privilege who had grown up in a world of financial safety nets, was looking not for a handout, but for wisdom, for the tools to forge his own path. Your father is right, I said when I could trust my voice again. I did work my way through college, with scholarships and multiple jobs. It wasn't easy, but it was formative. Those years taught me more about perseverance and resourcefulness than any classroom ever could. Jason leaned forward eagerly. That's exactly what I want to learn. Dad says those skills matter more than the name of the school on my diploma. We spent the next 2 hours at my dining room table, researching scholarship opportunities, discussing portfolio development strategies for design programs, exploring gap year options that might strengthen his application while allowing him to save money. I shared stories of my own college years, the challenges, the exhaustion, but also the profound satisfaction of earning every credit through my own efforts. Have you considered applying to both RISD and state schools? I suggested. Keep your options open, apply for every scholarship possible, and then make an informed decision when all the financial aid packages are in front of you. He nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. I shouldn't fixate on just one path. As our conversation wound down, I found myself reflecting on how different this interaction was from any I'd had with my own children at his age. They had grown up expecting parental financial support as their birthright. It had never occurred to them to view college funding as anything but guaranteed. "Jason," I said as he prepared to leave, "I want you to know how impressed I am by your approach to this challenge. Many young people would simply expect family resources to clear their path." He looked embarrassed but pleased. Dad talks about that a lot lately, about how he wishes he'd developed more independence earlier in life. He says the past few months have been like crash course adulting for him. I laughed at the apt description. Your father is learning valuable lessons, and he's ensuring you learn them earlier than he did. At the door, Jason paused. Grandma, there's one more thing. Dad doesn't know I'm telling you this, but he's really proud of how he's handling things now. Last week I overheard him telling Mom that for the first time in his adult life, he feels like he's standing on his own feet, not on your shoulders. He said it feels better than he ever imagined. The simple statement brought tears to my eyes. Thank you for sharing that, Jason. It means more than you know. After he left, I sat on my porch swing, processing our conversation. The ripple effects of my boundary setting were extending into the third generation, reshaping family dynamics in ways I couldn't have anticipated. My grandson had come to me not as an ATM, but as a mentor, seeking knowledge rather than currency, wisdom rather than a blank check. That evening, I received a text from Benjamin. Jason told me about your conversation. Thank you for guiding him toward independence rather than rescuing him. He came home energized about researching scholarships instead of defeated about costs. We're all learning. I smiled at the message, feeling our relationship healing in ways I hadn't thought possible 6 months earlier. The following week brought another unexpected development when Melissa called, her voice charged with uncharacteristic excitement. Mom, are you free for dinner tonight? Something amazing has happened, and I want to tell you in person. We met at a casual Italian restaurant downtown, where Melissa arrived practically vibrating with nervous energy. Before our drinks even arrived, she burst out with her news. I've been offered a partnership at the firm. Me, a partner at 46. Melissa, that's wonderful, I exclaimed, genuinely thrilled. She had returned to her marketing career, later than many of her peers, taking years away to raise the twins as a single mother. To rise to partnership level was a remarkable achievement. I still can't believe it, she admitted, her cheeks flushed with excitement. When Gerald called me into his office, I thought it might be about the Westridge campaign. Instead, he started talking about the firm's 5-year growth plan and how they wanted me to be part of the leadership team guiding that vision. They recognize your talent, I said. Your creative approach to the Madison account alone proved your strategic thinking. She looked surprised. You remember that campaign? Of course, I replied, slightly wounded that she would think otherwise. You walked me through the entire strategy over dinner last fall. It was brilliant work. I just didn't realize. She trailed off, then smiled apologetically. I guess I've underestimated how much attention you pay to my career. The comment revealed volumes about how she had perceived my interest in her life, as focused primarily on the grandchildren, perhaps, or on her financial needs rather than her professional accomplishments. I've always been proud of your work, I said quietly. Even when circumstances forced you to prioritize parenting over career advancement, your creativity never diminished. It just found different outlets temporarily. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you for that, for seeing the whole me, not just the struggling single mom. Our entrees arrived, and as we ate, Melissa shared the details of the partnership offer, the compensation package, the new responsibilities, the team she would be leading. The timing couldn't be better, she added. With the twins heading, To college, I'll have the capacity to fully commit to this role, and the financial aspects. She hesitated, then continued with newfound confidence. Well, for the first time since the divorce, I'll be more than comfortable on my own income. No more robbing Peter to pay Paul. No more lying awake calculating which bills can wait another week. You've worked incredibly hard for this, I acknowledged, both professionally and personally. I have, she agreed without false modesty. But I've also had tremendous support. She met my eyes directly. Mom, I know I wasn't always gracious about the financial help you provided all those years. Sometimes I resented feeling dependent, even while I accepted the assistance. It was complicated. Giving help can be complicated too, I admitted. There were times I enabled dependency rather than fostering growth, all while telling myself I was being supportive. We all have our reckonings to face. She nodded thoughtfully. Well, I want you to know I'll be taking over the twins' remaining college expenses, the portions not covered by scholarships and their own contributions. Your grandchildren will graduate without student loan debt, but it will be because of my efforts, not yours. That feels important somehow. It is important, I confirmed. For all of you. As we shared tiramisu for dessert, Melissa brought up an unexpected topic. So, I've been seeing someone. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. While she'd mentioned dating again, she had been characteristically private about specifics. Anyone I know? Actually, yes. She fidgeted with her napkin. It's James Harrington, from the Community Foundation Board. I did know James, a widower about my age, with grown children and grandchildren of his own. He was well respected in the community, thoughtful and intelligent without being showy about either quality. James is a lovely person, I said carefully, wondering about the age gap. Reading my expression, Melissa laughed. I know what you're thinking. He's almost 20 years older than me, but Mom, he's restful. After years of carrying everything alone, of being the responsible one, the planner, the fixer, it's incredibly appealing to be with someone who is steady, established, confident in who he is. I considered this, recognizing the wisdom in her perspective. That makes sense. You've had to be the rock for so long. Perhaps you need someone who can be a rock for you. Exactly, she said, looking relieved at my understanding. We're taking things very slowly. The twins, like him, they actually knew him before I did, through the youth symphony program he sponsors. And he respects my career, my independence. He's not looking for someone to take care of or to take care of him. Just a true partner. As she spoke about James, I noticed a relaxed quality to her expression I hadn't seen in years. The perpetual tension she'd carried since the divorce, the vigilant, slightly desperate energy of someone always bracing for the next crisis, had softened. He sounds wonderful, I said sincerely. I'd love to have dinner with both of you sometime, when you're ready for that step. I'd like that too, she said, then hesitated before adding, And Mom? Thank you for not judging the age difference, for seeing what matters instead of just the numbers. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter, who had deemed me too old for Thanksgiving dinner just months earlier, was now seeking my acceptance of her relationship with an older man. Age is just one dimension of who we are, I said gently. What matters is how people treat each other, how they make each other feel, whether they bring out the best in one another. Driving home that evening, I marveled at how profoundly our family dynamics had shifted. My children, once locked in patterns of dependency and avoidance, were emerging as their authentic selves. Benjamin reconnecting with creativity through woodworking, Melissa stepping into professional leadership and opening herself to new love, Daniel building his company while creating space for more balanced relationships. And I was changing too, expanding into new roles and interests that had nothing to do with maternal obligation. My advisory board position had led to speaking engagements at 2 technology conferences focused on designing for older adults. The Reimagined group had been featured in a regional magazine, bringing inquiries from women in neighboring states interested in starting their own chapters. Judith, Marion, and I had finalized our Cotswolds itinerary and were already researching New Zealand options for the winter. Most significantly, I had begun writing again, something I'd set aside decades earlier when motherhood and supporting Richard's career became all-consuming. It had started as simple journaling, processing my feelings about the family transformation. Gradually, it evolved into more structured essays about reclaiming identity in later life, about setting boundaries with adult children, about finding new purpose beyond traditional family roles. Judith had convinced me to share one essay with our Reimagined group. The response had been overwhelming, women recognizing their own struggles in my words, finding validation for their complicated feelings about aging and family dynamics. The community center director had then asked if I would consider leading a writing workshop for women over 60, focusing on life transitions and personal narrative. Your words give voice to experiences many women our age struggle to articulate, she'd explained. There's tremendous power in that kind of shared understanding. The workshop was scheduled to begin in August after the Cotswolds trip. I'd already started developing prompts and exercises, drawing on both my personal experience and the creative writing courses I'd taken in college, before practical concerns led me toward accounting instead. As July approached, bringing with it the anticipation of our English adventure, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary year of transformation our family had experienced. From the painful exclusion at Thanksgiving to the genuine connections now forming between us, connections based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. We had traveled an emotional distance I could scarcely have imagined. The weekend before my departure for England, Daniel organized a family dinner at his condo. Nothing fancy, he insisted when I offered to host instead. Just a casual evening before your big trip. I arrived to find not just my children and grandchildren, but also Melissa's new beau James, Benjamin's mother-in-law who was visiting from Oregon, and even my sister Vivian who lived in Philadelphia and rarely made the trip to Connecticut for family gatherings. The terrace had been transformed with string lights and colorful potted plants, a long table set for 12 with simple but elegant settings. Surprise, Daniel grinned as he took my purse. We couldn't let you leave for 3 weeks without a proper send-off. The evening unfolded with an ease we hadn't experienced as a family in years, perhaps ever. Conversations flowed naturally, laughter came readily, and most remarkably, no one treated me as fragile or peripheral. When the topic turned to my upcoming trip, the questions were engaged and thoughtful, focused on my interests and expectations rather than concerns about my capacity to travel. After dinner, as we lingered over coffee and the berry tart Claire had brought, Benjamin tapped his glass gently. I'd like to say something if I may. The table quieted, all eyes turning toward him. Benjamin had always been the most reserved of my children, the least likely to make spontaneous speeches or public declarations of feeling. A year ago, he began, his voice steady but threaded with emotion. Our family was in a very different place, functioning on the surface but underneath. He paused, searching for the right words. Underneath, we were caught in patterns none of us fully recognized or acknowledged. Mom was our financial safety net, often at significant personal cost. We accepted her support as our due while gradually, unconsciously, pushing her to the margins of our lives. I felt my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Around the table, expressions grew solemn, reflective. When Mom cut off the mortgage payments, Benjamin continued, I was angry. I felt betrayed. I couldn't see past my own entitlement to recognize the deeper issue. He looked directly at me, his eyes clear and unflinching. But Mom What initially felt like punishment was actually the most valuable gift you could have given us. You forced us to reclaim our independence, our self-sufficiency. You made us look honestly at the people we had become and decide if that's who we wanted to be. Melissa nodded, reaching for James's hand beside her. Daniel watched his brother with quiet approval. I won't pretend the adjustment was easy, Benjamin acknowledged. It wasn't. There were tough conversations, difficult decisions, uncomfortable realizations. But standing here now, I can say without qualification that our family is healthier than it's ever been. We're relating to each other as whole people, not as financial resources or obligations. He lifted his glass. So tonight, I want to toast our mother. For her courage in setting boundaries when it would have been easier to maintain the status quo. For believing in our capacity to stand on our own feet when we had forgotten how. And for showing us through her example that life's later chapters can be filled with adventure, purpose, and new beginnings. To Mom, my children echoed, raising their glasses. And to family transformation, Daniel added. May we never stop growing together. As glasses clinked around the table, I blinked back tears. Not tears of sadness or loss this time, but of profound gratitude for the journey we had taken together, through hurt and healing, through entitlement and accountability, through distance and reconnection. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, Vivian pulled me aside. You seem different, Eleanor, she observed, studying my face closely. Lighter somehow. More present. I considered her observation. I am different. For years after Richard died, I poured all my energy into being needed by my children. I measured my worth by what I could provide, what problems I could solve. When they excluded me from Thanksgiving, it shattered that identity completely. And now? She prompted. Now I understand that being needed isn't the same as being valued. That financial support isn't the same as genuine connection. That I have so much more to offer this world than just being a mother and grandmother. Vivian squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, little sister. It takes courage to rewrite the terms of relationship at any age, but especially after patterns have been set for decades. As I drove home that night, the full moon illuminating the familiar streets of Lakeside, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected. The painful circuit that began with exclusion from a family holiday had transformed into something profound, a recalibration of relationships, a reclamation of identity, a renaissance of spirit I could never have anticipated. The mortgages I had canceled had purchased something far more valuable than property. They had bought authenticity, respect, and genuine connection, not just for me, but for every member of our family. They had freed my children to become their best adult selves and liberated me to explore dimensions of identity beyond motherhood. As I packed the final items for my Cotswolds adventure the next morning, I paused at my bedroom window, gazing. Out at the garden Richard and I had planted together decades earlier. The perennials returned faithfully each year, but never exactly the same, always adapting to new conditions, finding fresh pathways toward the sun, evolving while remaining essentially themselves. Just like us, I whispered, thinking of our family's transformation. Growing in directions we never imagined possible. The Cotswolds greeted us with storybook charm, rolling green hills, honey-colored stone cottages, gardens bursting with summer blooms, and skies that seemed impossibly blue after Connecticut's recent heatwave. Judith, Marion, and I settled into our rented cottage in Bourton-on-the-Water, marveling at the medieval bridges spanning the gentle river Windrush that flowed through the village center. I feel like I've stepped into a postcard, Marion sighed, as we enjoyed morning coffee in our garden that first day, the sun dappling through an ancient apple tree. Or perhaps a Jane Austen novel. Without the restrictive corsets or social constraints, thankfully, Judith quipped, stretching her legs contentedly. Though I wouldn't mind encountering a Mr. Darcy while we're here. I laughed, feeling younger. than I had in decades. I'll settle for good company, beautiful scenery, and perhaps a scone or two. The 3 weeks unfolded like a dream, each day bringing new discoveries. We explored picturesque villages with names that felt like poetry. On the Tongue, Stow on the Wold, Chipping Campden, Lower Slaughter. We wandered through gardens that had been cultivated for centuries, visited stately homes with histories stretching back to Tudor times, and sampled local delicacies in quaint tea rooms and village pubs. In Stratford-upon-Avon, we attended a Royal Shakespeare Company performance of Much Ado About Nothing, the actors bringing fresh life to words written over 4 centuries ago. In Oxford, we toured the venerable colleges, tracing the footsteps of literary giants and world-changing thinkers. In Bath, we soaked in the thermal waters as Romans had done nearly 2,000 years earlier, emerging refreshed and somehow connected to that ancient continuity of human experience. Throughout our adventures, I found myself reaching for my journal each evening, capturing not just the sights and experiences, but the emotions they evoked, the sense of perspective that comes from standing in places that have witnessed centuries of human joy and sorrow, the liberation of experiencing a culture different from my own, the profound pleasure of discovery unencumbered by responsibility for others. One evening, as we shared a bottle of local cider in our cottage garden, Judith observed, "You know what I love most about traveling at our age? We've lived enough to truly appreciate what we're seeing. These experiences land differently than they would have when we were younger." Marian nodded thoughtfully. In my 30s, I would have been checking attractions off a list, comparing my experiences to some internalized standard of what travel should be. Now, I'm simply present for whatever each moment offers. And there's a freedom in traveling. When it's purely for ourselves, I added. No accommodating children's attention spans or partners' preferences, just following our own curiosities. Speaking of which, Judith said, refilling our glasses, I've been thinking about our New Zealand plans. What if we extended the trip by a week and added a few days in Australia? The Great Barrier Reef has been on my bucket list forever, and with climate change. We should see it while we can, Marian finished for her. I'm in. I hesitated, briefly, thinking of the additional expense and time away. Then I caught myself. This old pattern of cautious calculation, of limiting experiences out of some vague sense that resources must always be preserved for family needs. Absolutely, I declared. Let's do it. The reef, Sydney, all of it. Their surprised smiles told me they had expected more deliberation from me. I was surprising myself too, embracing spontaneity, prioritizing adventure, allocating resources to my own dreams without second-guessing. This was the new Eleanor emerging, not reckless, but liberated from needless constraints of my own creation. That night, I called Daniel to check in, the time difference meaning I caught him just arriving at his office. "Mom, how's England treating you?" His voice carried across the Atlantic with perfect clarity. "It's magical," I told him, describing our recent visits to Blenheim Palace and the Cotswold lavender fields. "You sound so happy," he observed. "It makes me wish I'd encouraged you to travel more after Dad died, instead of—" He trailed off. "Instead of treating me like a convenient source of childcare and financial support?" I finished, keeping my tone light but the words honest. "Yeah," he acknowledged. "That's exactly what I mean." "Well, I participated in that dynamic too," I reminded him. "I could have set boundaries earlier, made different choices. But what matters is that we're all growing now." "We definitely are," he agreed. "Speaking of which, I have news. That woman I've been seeing, Dr. Erin Reynolds, I've asked her to move in with me." "That's wonderful, Daniel," I said sincerely. "She strikes me as someone who challenges and compliments you." "She does," he said, his voice warming. "She's brilliant and kind and completely unimpressed by material trappings. When I first showed her my condo, she laughed and said it looked like a furniture showroom with no personality. I chuckled, recalling the sleek but somewhat soulless decor of his downtown space. What did you say to that? I admitted she was right, he said. That I'd paid a designer to create a look I thought projected success, but that it never really felt like home. So now we're slowly transforming it together, keeping some pieces, replacing others with things that have meaning or bring joy. The metaphor wasn't lost on me, my son rebuilding his living space to reflect authenticity rather than appearance, just as he was reconstructing his approach to life and relationships. I'm happy for you, I said. Truly. There's more, he continued. Remember how you convinced me to take that woodworking class with Ben a few months ago? Well, I've gotten completely hooked. Aaron and I made a dining table together last weekend. Nothing fancy, but it's solid and it's ours. Ben guided us through the process. It felt significant somehow. I blinked back tears, imagining my two sons working together, creating something tangible with their hands, sharing skills and time rather than competing as they often had in childhood. That sounds wonderful, Daniel. Your father would have loved seeing that. I thought about him the whole time, Daniel said softly, wondering if he was watching somehow, approving of his tools being used again. He would have been delighted, I assured him. We chatted a while longer before saying goodbye, the conversation leaving me with a warm glow that complemented the gentle English evening settling around our cottage. The remainder of the trip passed in a blur of beauty and discovery. By the time we boarded our flight home, I felt simultaneously refreshed and pleasantly exhausted. My camera filled with hundreds of photos, my journal with dozens of entries, and my heart with memories I would cherish forever. Returning to Lakeside after 3 weeks away, I noticed details about my community with fresh eyes. The particular quality of New England architecture, the distinctive tree species lining my street, the familiar rhythm of life in my small town. Travel's greatest gift, perhaps, is the renewed appreciation it grants for home. Melissa greeted me at the airport, having insisted on picking me up despite my protests that I could easily take a car service. You look wonderful, Mom, she observed, as we drove toward Lakeside. Relaxed, glowing, somehow more vibrant. I feel wonderful, I confirmed. The trip was everything I hoped for and more. Your emails and photos were amazing, she said. James and I have been talking about doing something similar when the twins start college, a fresh adventure to mark our new chapter. I glanced at her, noting the casual way she included James in her future plans. Their relationship was clearly deepening in meaningful ways. How are the twins handling the college preparations? I asked. Excited, nervous, the usual. She smiled. Emma's already planning her dorm decor, while Ethan is more focused on what clubs he might join. But the most interesting development is actually financial. Oh? I kept my tone casual, though my interest was piqued. They both got summer jobs without any prompting from me, she explained. Emma's working at that boutique on Elm Street, and Ethan's doing landscape maintenance for the town. They've opened special accounts for college expenses and are saving most of their earnings. That's impressive, I said, genuinely pleased. What prompted this sudden financial responsibility? Melissa signaled for a turn, quiet for a moment. Honestly, I think it was watching our family's transformation these past months. Seeing Benjamin and Claire downsize, Daniel embrace a more authentic lifestyle, me taking control of my finances. She glanced at me briefly. And you, Mom, showing all of us that it's never too late to reclaim independence and pursue new dreams. The observation warmed my heart. The ripple effects of boundary setting were extending to the youngest generation, shaping their approach to money and responsibility before patterns of dependency could form. As we turned onto my street, Melissa added, They've also started asking me about investing basics. I've been teaching them what I know, but I thought, maybe you might want to have a few financial literacy sessions with them before they leave for school? Your knowledge in that area far exceeds mine. I'd love to, I said, touched by the invitation. Not to provide money this time, but to share knowledge, to empower rather than rescue. At home, I found a welcoming surprise. My gardens had been meticulously maintained in my absence, not a weed in sight, the late summer blooms flourishing under careful attention. Benjamin and Jason took care of it, Melissa explained, noticing my surprise. They came by every few days to water and weed. Jason said it was the least they could do while you were away. The gesture touched me deeply. My son and grandson, giving their time and effort rather than assuming hired help, would manage in my absence. A true gift of service, expecting nothing in return. The next morning, I had barely finished unpacking when my doorbell rang. It was Claire, bearing a basket of fresh muffins and late summer berries. "Welcome home," she greeted me warmly. "I thought you might appreciate some homemade breakfast after your long journey." Over coffee and still warm blueberry muffins, she filled me in on family developments during my absence. The sale of their former house had finalized, bringing a sense of closure to that chapter. Benjamin's woodworking skills were progressing rapidly, with a growing list of friends requesting custom pieces. Jason had secured 2 promising scholarships for college and was working on applications with renewed focus. But the most significant news, Claire continued, is about Benjamin's mother. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Margaret, Benjamin's mother, had always maintained a rather distant relationship with our family, her prickly personality and judgmental nature making close connection difficult. "She's moving to Lakeside," Claire said, "into Cedar Grove Senior Apartments." Really? This was unexpected. Margaret had lived in Arizona for decades, having relocated there shortly after her divorce from Benjamin's father. That's quite a change for her. Claire nodded. It was her idea, which shocked all of us. She said watching our family's transformation from afar made her realize how much she's missed by keeping distance between herself and her son. She doesn't want to waste whatever time she has left. I absorbed this information slowly. Margaret was several years older than me, approaching 80, and had never shown much interest in being an engaged grandmother or mother-in-law. Benjamin is cautiously optimistic, Claire continued. Their relationship has always been complicated, as you know. But he wants to give this new chapter a genuine chance. That's very generous of him, I observed. Benjamin had carried wounds from his mother's emotional unavailability throughout his life. Opening himself to potential further hurt demonstrated remarkable growth. He says he learned from watching you and him rebuild your relationship, Claire said softly. That sometimes family connections need complete reconstruction, not just surface repairs. After she left, I sat on my porch swing, processing all I'd learned since returning home. The transformations continued to unfold, rippling outward in unexpected directions. Benjamin rebuilding bonds with his difficult mother, the twins embracing financial responsibility before college. Daniel finding authentic partnership while reconnecting with creativity through woodworking. None of these developments would likely have occurred if I had maintained the status quo, continuing to subsidize my children's lifestyles while accepting peripheral treatment in return. My painful exclusion from Thanksgiving had catalyzed a family renaissance none of us could have anticipated. The following weeks brought a gentle return to routine, albeit a transformed one. My writing workshop at the community center launched with 15 enthusiastic participants, all women over 60 with stories to tell and insights to share. The advisory board position at Daniel's company expanded to include mentoring young, female executives navigating leadership challenges. The reimagined group continued to flourish, with plans for a weekend retreat in the Berkshires that fall. One crisp September morning, as leaves began their annual transformation from green to gold, my doorbell rang unexpectedly early. I opened it to find Benjamin on my porch, holding a wooden case I didn't recognize. "Morning, Mother," he greeted me, seeming slightly nervous. "I hope I'm not disturbing you too early." "Not at all," I assured him, ushering him inside. I've been up for hours. Would you like coffee? Please, he nodded, following me to the kitchen. As I prepared our drinks, he placed the wooden case carefully on my table, his hands lingering on its polished surface. Once we were seated with steaming mugs before us, he finally spoke. I made something for you, he said, pushing the case gently in my direction. A thank you gift, though that hardly seems adequate for what you've given our family this year. Intrigued, I opened the hinged lid carefully. Inside, nestled in velvet lining, lay an exquisite fountain pen and a leather-bound journal. The pen's body was crafted from richly grained wood, with delicate inlays creating a subtle pattern along its length. The journal's cover featured the same wood as an inset panel, surrounded by supple brown leather. Benjamin, I breathed, lifting the pen carefully. This is extraordinary. The wood is from Dad's workshop, he explained quietly. Some cherry he'd been saving for a special project, I thought. He hesitated, emotion briefly tightening his voice. I thought he would approve of it being used for something that encourages your writing. Tears pricked my eyes as I examined the craftsmanship, the hours of patient work evident in every detail. It's perfect, I managed, running my fingers over the smooth surface. Absolutely perfect. You mentioned once that you used to write, before marriage and motherhood took precedence, he continued. And Melissa told me about your workshop at the community center, how meaningful it's been for the participants. I thought perhaps it was time you had proper tools for your own writing journey. The thoughtfulness of the gift overwhelmed me, not just the physical items themselves, but the recognition of this rediscovered part of my identity, the acknowledgement of aspirations beyond family roles. Your father would be so proud of your craftsmanship, I said, meeting his eyes directly. And even more proud of the man you've become this year? Benjamin flushed slightly at the praise. I had a belated realization recently, he admitted. For years, I thought Dad's primary legacy was financial, the security he built for our family, the opportunities his success created for us. But watching you these past months, I've understood that his true legacy was in values, not resources. The integrity with which he lived his life, the balance he maintained between work and presence, the respect he showed to everyone, regardless of status. I nodded, my own memories of Richard rising to the surface. Not the successful businessman the world had seen, but the husband who had never made me feel less than despite my more modest career, who had been genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings, who had shown up fully for family life, despite professional demands. He would be especially proud of how you've reconnected with his love of woodworking, I said. That was such a central part of who he was. Benjamin's expression softened. Working with his tools, I sometimes feel him with me in the workshop. Not in any mystical sense, but in the muscle memory the tools themselves seem to carry, the techniques he perfected over decades. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the gift between us bridging past and present, honoring what had been while celebrating what was becoming. Did I mention that Mother arrives next week? Benjamin finally said, changing subjects. She's already talking about hosting Thanksgiving this year at her new apartment, which is wildly impractical given the size, but demonstrates surprising enthusiasm. I chuckled, imagining Margaret attempting to coordinate a family gathering in a space designed for single occupancy. Perhaps a restaurant would be more practical for her first hosting effort. That's what Claire suggested, Benjamin agreed. But the important thing is that she wants to be with family for the holiday. That's new. Speaking of Thanksgiving, I ventured. Have you all made plans yet? He met my eyes directly. We were hoping you would host again, actually. If you're willing. No one does it like you, and after last year's disaster without you. He grimaced at the memory. I'd love to, I said simply. With one condition, he added. We all contribute meaningfully. Not just bringing a side dish, but sharing the real work. Setting up, cleaning up, the whole process. You shouldn't have to carry it all anymore. The offer warmed me deeply, not just the recognition of effort, but the desire for genuine partnership in creating family experiences. I think that sounds perfect, I agreed. After Benjamin left, I sat at my kitchen table, admiring his gift and reflecting on the extraordinary year of transformation our family had experienced. From exclusion and hurt to reconnection and growth. From financial dependency to mutual respect. From taking one another for granted to genuine appreciation. The mortgage payments I'd canceled had initially seemed like punishment to my children. A retributive withdrawal of support in response to thoughtless exclusion. What none of us had anticipated was how that single boundary would create space for authentic relationship to flourish, how financial disentanglement would allow emotional connection to deepen. I traced the grain of the wooden pen, thinking of Richard's hands working with this same cherry, of Benjamin's fingers continuing that legacy, of the words I would write with this gift, perhaps a memoir of our family's journey, perhaps essays, about aging with agency, perhaps simply private reflections on this extraordinary chapter of life. Whatever form my writing took, I knew this truth would infuse it. Sometimes the most valuable gift we can offer those we love is the chance to stand on their own feet, to discover their own strength, to build lives authentic to their true selves rather than dependent on external support. And sometimes the most crucial journey we can undertake is the one that leads us back to ourselves, to dormant passions, to deferred dreams, to dimensions of identity overshadowed by roles and responsibilities. Even at 72, I was discovering new possibilities, new connections, new purpose. That evening, I took my beautiful new pen and journal to the porch swing as sunset painted the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold. Opening to the first blank page, I began to write. The day my children told me I was too old for Thanksgiving dinner, I thought my world was ending. Instead, it was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.